Hello everyone, welcome to the Age-Old Theatre at the Museum of Sydney for the second in our series of iconic Australian houses talks. My name's Ian Innes, I'm an Assistant Director of Heritage and Portfolios for Sydney Living Museums, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today and introduce Fenella Kernebone, our host. I'd like to commence today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which the museum stands, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to pay my respects to the elders past and present. Our four iconic Australian houses talks bring together some of Australia's most respected architects, academics and designers, but also bring together current owners of some of the selected homes that are featured in our exhibition, Iconic Australian Houses, curated by Karen McCartney, who's one of today's speakers. And if you haven't had the chance to see the exhibition yet, you'll have some time at the end of today's talks to visit the gallery upstairs, which will still be open until 5 p.m. I just have a couple of very short housekeeping announcements. If you haven't already, would you please turn off your mobile phone or pager? Please don't take photographs or record today's event. We are actually recording all of the talks, and you'll have the chance to watch them again on our website, so they'll be on our website shortly. Maybe next week sometime, maybe Monday, you'll receive an audience survey via email, and we'd really love to have your feedback on today's event and any other Sydney Living Museum events that you've been to. The presentation this afternoon is going to last for approximately 1 hour, including time for questions at the end. Karen McCartney's Iconic Australian Houses books, which were actually the inspiration for the exhibition upstairs, are also for sale at the museum shop on the ground floor. So now I need to stop talking and hand over to today's host, Fenella Kernebone, whom I'm sure will already be very well known to all of you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Fenella.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ian Innes, for the introduction, and welcome to you all. It's wonderful to be here, and yes, on what is such a crisp day outside, so nice and toasty here at the Museum of Sydney. I'm sure many of you have had a chance to see the exhibition, but I do encourage you, if you haven't, to go upstairs and to sit down and to really watch the video. And Karen maybe might tell a little bit about that later on. You never know. It is a pleasure to introduce our guests today, each of whom have an intimate knowledge when it comes to living in a home by a great Australian architect. They're going to be giving you some background to their story, to their homes, how they came to live in their homes, what it's like to live in an iconic house. Does it feel like they're living in an iconic house? Do they wake up in the morning and say, "This is iconic, this is amazing"?
Always.
Who knows? Or is it just their home? I'm really curious to hear their stories about what it's like, and I tell you what, these are some pretty amazing homes. You'll be seeing some images on the screen behind me as well a little later, as Ian said, a chance to ask some questions of our guests today. So let me introduce them. We have Bill, Karen and Neil. But firstly, Bill is in the middle, Dr Bill Lyons. Welcome to you, hello. Bill lives in a really beautiful home. I had a cup of tea there the other day, in fact. It's designed by Robin Boyd. Bill has some fantastic stories to tell you, so I won't go into great detail, but it is quite an extraordinary home, and it's the first Robin Boyd home in New South Wales. Round of applause, Dr Bill Lyons. Good to have you here. Also, Neil Buhrich is on my left. He is the son of the late Hugh and Eva Buhrich, and he grew up, as you can imagine, in some very iconic homes designed and built by his father, Hugh Buhrich. He's currently living in the second home, the Buhrich house at Castle Crag. It has some incredible features. I'm very much looking forward to hearing about your experiences growing up and living in this home and other homes as well. So welcome to you, Neil. Thank you.
Thanks.
And the ever-lovely Karen McCartney, the brains behind the exhibition, the author of the books that you'll be able to buy a copy of, that I've seen adorn many a friend's coffee table and bookshelf, and mine as well, Iconic Australian Houses. She also lives in an iconic house of her own, a very particular type of commitment to living, I imagine. It's the Marshall House by Bruce Rickard. Welcome, Karen. So each of our speakers are going to talk for about 7 minutes. We'll open it up to a conversation and then open up to you for some Q&A as well. So Karen, you're the guinea pig. You get to go first.
Off I go.
Take it away.
I've promised Fenella 7 minutes, so I'm going to set my phone here.
And I'm a real bully. So
I know. Yeah. We're all terrified. So I'm here to talk about the Marshall House, and I wanted to tell you a bit about how I came to live in the house. I was editing a magazine called Inside Out at the time, which is an interiors magazine, and my deputy editor came to me with some pictures, and she said, "This is your sort of thing, this house." And it was, and I was very excited about it, but I didn't know anything. I had no knowledge about Bruce Rickard or actually Australian architecture, full stop. But I discovered that it was an open day the next day. And so we went along. My husband was away, so I went with my architect brother-in-law, and we went around the house. And I actually fell in love with it on the spot without knowing anything about it intellectually. But it was interesting walking around, hearing different people's comments. One woman wanted to knock out the brick wall that faced west because then you could have a bigger picture window. Somebody else wanted to paint all the bricks, so that paint them white. Now, even then, I knew that there was something intrinsically wrong with this approach. But we didn't have money to buy the house. We'd sold our house in London, and property deals are very prolonged in the UK. And so when it came to the auction, we actually had no money to go and attend the auction. So we just had to sit tight, and it was passed in. Because the previous owners, having lived in the house for 33 years, really had to go to auction to kind of see what the market was prepared to pay. But once they'd done that, they were then happy to come back to us. And it felt like one of those things in life that was meant to be. I mean, I was phoning the owner before saying, we've got the perfect furniture for this house. We really are the people that you want to live in it. And so we then got to know Bruce Rickard, and we'd go on these little tours of the northern beaches and meet other people with Bruce Rickard houses. So we were sort of in this strange little club of Bruce Rickard fans. And because Bruce was often asked to speak at the institute, and he didn't like speaking, so what he'd do is he'd get his clients to speak on his behalf. And so suddenly I had to think about and intellectualize what it was that I really did like about the house. You couldn't just say any old thing. You actually had to express it clearly. So it taught me to think about the house. And that's what I want to tell you today, some of the things that I've learned that I love about the house, and I think are so great about it that Bruce has taught me to articulate. And one of the first things that this picture shows is the sighting. Bruce was he trained as a landscaper at one point, and he was very interested in native plants, and so encouraged the Marshalls to plant native plants and trees. So we bought the house in 2000, so 33 years on, we are the sort of have the result of that beautiful natural planting. And it's such a modest house. When you're down on Sandy Bay and you look up at all the white, look at me sort of houses, it's almost impossible to see the house. It actually really sits very discreetly within the landscape. Bruce didn't know where to put the front door. Because he wanted the house face north, and he wanted to capture all that northerly light, especially in winter. And so he decided just to make it a wall of glass doors. So you could have many front doors. Of course, we only use one, but in effect, there is no one single front door. This was the furniture I boasted to Penny Marshall about having that fitted so well with the house. We don't have this set anymore because the three-legged chairs, the kids kept slipping off and banging their chin on the... it's a design fault of the Danish, but maybe the Danes know how to sit on them better than us. But it's such a beautiful spot there. And now we have a sort of day bed, because on a day like today, like we were discussing with Ian, it's the perfect day to just sit in the sun. And you can see how it all opens up and inside connects with out, which I'll talk about a bit more. This is the kitchen. The house is completely untouched. We have restored, but the only thing that we've actually changed is the garage, because it's down a very steep slope and we had to put in a turning circle. But we went back to Bruce and we reused the sandstock bricks and he redesigned it for us. So everything else is as original. And so you can see it's this quite modest kitchen. I don't think the Marshalls had a whole lot of money at the time, but they just let Bruce go for it. So you can see these lovely little brass D handles and very simple inbuilt shelving and so forth. These are some of the little details in the house that I love. That stainless steel bench is the original, and it just sort of seems to get better with age, with the patina. And these little pot stands that pull out, you can use as chopping boards and so forth. So although it's modest, it actually is very well considered. Bruce didn't like this idea that you could see the kitchen and all the mess of cooking. So on one side, this is the other side of the kitchen. So the fireplace is on that side. And the sandstock bricks were recycled. So even then he was thinking about sort of sustainability, recycled from houses that were demolished when they were developing the railway in the eastern suburbs. And they're really beautiful, characterful bricks. You know, I know that some bricks are kind of orange and not so nice, but these are lovely bricks, and I wouldn't have been happy to paint them white at all. You can also see the treatment of the ceiling. It's got this wonderful timber ceiling, and he was a great admirer of Frank Lloyd Wright, and what he loved about Wright's houses was he said it was like living inside a rum barrel, you know, that lovely feeling of timber and the way it's beautifully warm. And this is how sort of inside and out connect. And it was one of the signatures of that period that really we live with today, or we desire to live with today, the way the two spaces, so you can see the way the materials, the brick continues seamlessly and the timber continues as well. So the eye just drifts from inside to outside. The other very well considered thing is the lighting scheme. These are inbuilt shelving with these linen-clad lights, which are something of a signature of Bruce's houses of this period. But even you can actually just see, let me try the pointer thing, up here, these little square lights. So everything was recessed, nothing hangs down into the space, it's all flush with the ceiling. And it means also that you can turn on pockets of light. So it's one big space, but actually you can just illuminate one bit at a time. This is just a beautiful shot of the exterior and that lower deck. So the bedrooms aren't large, they're kind of cabin-like, but they all have double doors opening up onto the deck that faces the view. So he was very practical in terms of space. And we were just saying, you know, today how it's a house where you use every single room. There is no redundant space. There's, you know, nothing that isn't used daily. And this is looking into the bedroom. And the bedrooms have this sort of pelmet above the bed, and the light is just a bulb that you screw in. So these kind of just really simple solutions to everyday considerations. And really, you just needed to move your furniture in. You didn't need lights, or all the wardrobes are built in. So it's a very kind of complete house that you just step into. And I think that adds to that sense that you are a custodian rather than, you know, owning it because you don't actually change it. This is a lovely little example that kind of just pulls in the whole material palette, where you see there's the brick, there's the timber and the glass, and this lovely little inbuilt desk. And that's in the master bedroom. And there's a little ensuite. The bathrooms are very small. You know, by today's standards, they're just very little. They're not your spa or your sanctuary. They're actually just a simple bathroom or shower room. And that's the Lyons, or onto the Lyons house. I don't know if I did my 7 minutes or... 9. 9? Okay. Oh no, I'll be punished later. Bill.
Oh, thank you.
Just to be fair, Karen McCartney, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry. And another round of applause for Dr Bill Lyons.
I can't possibly match Karen's amusing story. It's in a somewhat more serious vein and relates almost entirely to the birth of the Lyons house, which had some concerning moments. In 1967, I was a young orthopaedic surgeon married with 4 young children, and obviously a wife, establishing a practice in the Port Hacking area. And I came into possession of an interesting piece of land. It was on the very highest prow of a headland of a peninsula projecting into Port Hacking. I thought I'd always had considerable interest in architecture, not so much from a technical point of view, but from the point of view of the relationship between client and architect, which I thought often wasn't of the best and didn't yield the best results, particularly for the client. I was hoisted with my own petard as soon as I bought this. I had to build. I first went along to see Harry Seidler, an icon of himself of architecture at the time in Sydney, and we had about a 45-minute meeting, or rather a talk from Harry. And I quickly realised that we were not kindred souls. We didn't seem to have much in common as far as the relation between client and architect was concerned. I thanked him for his time and left. I then decided to consult Robin Boyd, who was in Melbourne at the time. I wrote to him and asked him if he would be interested in designing a house for me and supervising its building. And he said, although he wrote back to me and said that he was very pleased to be so asked. Yes, he would be keen to do so, and he didn't think that the problems of supervising were insurmountable, particularly as at the time he was designing Expo 67, the Australian exhibit in Expo 67 in Montreal, and he was passing through Sydney fairly regularly. So as you see, there is a problem already with the midwife of this birth. Within a week or two of agreeing to do the job for me, he corresponded with me and said that on the morrow, the next day from when I received it, he would be passing through Sydney, had a few hours in the afternoon, and could we possibly meet? That particular day, I had a busy surgery, and the only way I could help him was to, my secretary did wonders and squeezed this way and that and produced a half an hour appointment, you might say, in the middle of my suburban surgery. Again, not a good start to our first meeting. Boyd, the famous Boyd, had to sit in the waiting room and wait till I called him. Nevertheless, I thought at that time it was going from bad to worse, but nevertheless he took it in the greatest of spirit, and we had a wonderfully productive half hour together. I explained to him briefly how I lived, or how I and my children and wife lived, and basically the necessities of of such a house. I'd always believed in that adage that a house is a machine to live in. I said that my requirements would be quite limited, and I gave him 6 elements that I'd require in the design, but beyond that I didn't restrict him in any way. Firstly, I wanted absolute privacy from the surrounding area, typical suburban area, which had been very heavily developed, although this piece of land I had was vacant. The second thing was that I also wanted a swimming pool, and again I wanted privacy. I didn't want it to be in the back garden, open to all, and presumably that would mean it would become an integral part of the house. Thirdly, I wanted him to explore further his interest in this new architectural movement of lightening the appearance of houses and opening them up to the environment. The fourth thing was that with my children approaching adolescence, that there was likely to be a significant amount of motor vehicles in the household, and I wanted easy entrance and egress and some covering or protection for motor vehicles of a considerable number. I don't know whether I was wise or foolish about that. The other two things were that my wife was then a leader pianist, and she wanted some setup in which she could have small soirees. And the last was that there was some division in the house between the young and the old by sliding doors or whatever that would allow separation of the two groups, at least temporarily. He asked me only two questions. Which room in the house would you accept no view? And I said the study. He said, did I have any strong ideas on the material that the house was to be built of or the layout of the house? And I said no. I put it simply, that was his problem, or that was his problem to provide an answer to mine. He said, well, let's go and have a look at the land, and we drove up to it. He got me to drive the vehicle right up onto the crest of the hill of the land, climbed up on the top of the motor car, looked around and said, we've got to go up. We didn't have much more time, so I raced him home. My wife watered and fed him with great speed, and I, with even greater speed, took him to the airport, and he got the last flight to Melbourne just in time, which in those days was 6 p.m, shades of the change in the world.
1 minute, Bill.
1 minute. Soon afterwards, he sent me a perspective view in colour of the proposed house and a floor plan, and we fell in love with it. There was no real criticism from our side. It had answered all our problems, and the house was put to tender. The builder Ellis obtained, and the building was built at the beginning of 1967, and we were able to begin living in it at the end of October. I've lived in it for some 47 years in very, very variable circumstances. The first family were raised, grew up, and in the usual way left. I was then divorced, lived alone in it for a while, remarried, and my wife Sandy and I have lived in the house for the last 35 years. We've raised 2 children there and have left in the usual course of events, and we're still there. We're in what I think is the empty nest situation, but nevertheless we have no interest in getting out of the house. It's been a very, very adaptable home, and the fact that we've lived there for so long under such varying circumstances really speaks of the skill of its designer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lyons. We'll talk more about, of course, what it's like to live there after 47 years. It's extraordinary. So from Robin Boyd's home to Hugh Buhrich's home, lived in by Neil Buhrich, his son. Please make him welcome.
My parents were both architects, as was my brother, and I've lived in two of my father's so-called iconic houses during the course of my life. This first house, the one I was raised in, is on a very steep slope, and I do think it's a difficult site can often lead to a more interesting building. The house was designed and built by my father from the late 40s into the 50s, and built pretty much on his own on the weekends. And when one floor was finished every year or two, we would move the dining seats comprising indestructible milk crates up another floor. The stone wall was cut from stone on site by hand, no grinders then, and you can imagine a very high scaffolding precariously nailed together with 4x3 timbers on which my brother and I, from a young age, were allowed to clamber at will. In my teenage years, when friends visited at home on weekends, my father used to dragoon them into helping him on the site, and after a few visits, my friends no longer wanted to meet me at my house on the weekends. They never came back. Once the house was completed, it was not uncommon for a car to slow up or stop in the street outside so the passengers could look at the house, especially the flat roof. But to me, living there, it was just an ordinary house, nothing special, apart from the fact that it was unfinished for most of the years I lived there. However, even I, at the time, recognised that this was a beautiful timber circular stair which he made towards the end of the, when he started finishing off the house. It's a photo by Max Japan. And it's not moulded out of a piece of timber, it's blocks, glued and screwed up endlessly. It took months. Actually, it's very interesting because it was fixed at the top and the bottom, and as you walked up it sprung. So when you put your foot where the step was, it had gone up or down an inch, and so you'd keep tripping on it. And that's a glass wall there next to it, and literally a 40-foot drop. So he had to put a brace in the middle, and then it only creaked. Now, several years later, following my father's death, or it was many years later actually, I moved into the second house which he had designed for himself and my mother. And my mother had died many years previously, and again he essentially built this house on his own, apart from a concrete slab. And this is the house completed in the early 70s, and it's now on the State Heritage Registry. The photos that follow are by Michael Wee, and they're taken from Karen's book, which is downstairs. The house is on you can't see it here, but this house is on a very steep site. It's a small house set among the foliage with views from across the harbour. And the rooms have right angles, and the overall structure is more organic than the first house, but it still has crisp lines. And this is the main entrance, and you can see the sort of sinusoidal copper fascia which reflects the ceiling inside, which is shown here. Not quite. The next photo shows it better. This is the living room. My father did not like finicky details. And you can see that there are no handles on the cupboard doors. And behind the doors on the right is the hi-fi equipment. Loudspeakers were always put into the walls, and strip lights were hidden behind pelmets. The strip lights are above the glass windows on the left. They go right along the whole distance. And he did his own wiring, and strip lights require a booster, a little fuse box, I forget what it's called, but one of those strip lights don't work, and I could never find, I don't know where the fuse box is. I've had electricians, they've looked for a day or two, I've taken parts of the ceiling, Anyway, no, the strip light's missing. This is a picture of the. This is the position of the furniture. This is a picture of the dining room. The kitchen's on the right. The position of the furnishings, like the sofa there and the dining room, are fixed, and they've been carefully planned through, and you can't move them. You don't really want to move them, because if you do, something else doesn't fit properly. You can see that the fridge is actually bar size, and that's the fridge there, and actually there's no appropriate space to put in a bigger fridge, so we've learned to live with a bar size fridge, and it's not very hard. Everyone did in those days. And also the front of the fridge is veneered to match the cupboards, and that was something that was fairly innovative at the time, I think. The ceilings moulded steamed ply, steamed cedar, and from the corner of those steps to the ceiling is low. You can touch the ceiling. So that ceiling was too low for the council to allow. So he decided to put the ceiling up between the roof joists and to make it a bit higher there, and thereby increase the average height and get the council to accept it. That's what he said. I don't know if it's true. I think he probably just liked the design of it. This is the kitchen. It's set in an open plan design. You can see there are no handles, and it's neat, but it's not a modular kitchen. And when it needs to be replaced, the fittings will need to be individually made, and there are costs to looking after protected houses. Having no fear of heights, my father used to walk down these steps at 84. You can see there's no railings. And that wouldn't have been such a big problem, except it's about a 10-metre drop, more or less down to the water, onto oysters. And challenged by visitors about the absent railing, he used to insist that the structure was a sculpture and not a stair, and the council should just see it as a sculpture. My young grandchildren love climbing up the stairs, and it used to worry me quite a lot. My parents used to let me do it, but I won't let my kids do it. And then I decided to block off the whole thing with pot plants. Block off for the kids going up there. I don't know how well it works, but anyway, that's what we did. Now, my father he didn't use many colours. Black and white was what he liked. He said he had no colour sense, and some people would argue this proves it. But occasionally he'd splash out on this bathroom is moulded, what's this material? I can't... Fiberglass, sorry. It's moulded fiberglass, and it's the ceiling, floor, everything's in two pieces. You can see where the line is. And again, there's not many bits that stick out. That's the glass window. It's got no curtains, and it fully exposes a person in the shower to anyone paddling by it. And that was never a worry to my father anyway, more it was to my mother. So what influence has this experience had for me? My parents, as with many European refugees arriving in Australia in the late 30s, were quite sophisticated about the arts, and through their influence I began to appreciate various art forms. I don't know how other people come to experience pleasure in the arts, but for me there was a fairly clear chronological order. During the late adolescence, I became interested in literature, and soon thereafter painting, and a little later in sculpture. Then there was a gap of several years before I favoured classical music over rock and roll. But oddly, I never really became interested in architecture until my late 30s. And I never had this epiphany about modern architecture that that Karen has had. But my interest since then has grown, especially obviously with modern architecture. I go overseas and look at famous modern architects. So I feel I've been enriched by this experience, and I feel lucky to be spending a few years in this beautiful house that I often still feel in some way belonged to my parents.
And thank you very much to Neil Buhrich, Bill Lyons, and also Karen McCartney there. So much to talk about, so many questions. I think the most important one is where do you put the Bollinger in that bar fridge? The wine, the champagne, how do you fit it in there?
Well, I'm still saving up for the Bollinger.
We're taking donations afterwards.
We've actually got a fridge. It's in another room, down the corridor.
Secrets out.
Past the toilet and the bathroom and the bedroom. And you only put in the small fridge the stuff you need day by day. The modern fridge, I think the kitchen's probably smaller than a modern fridge.
That's it. Which kind of leads me to this point about, and I know that there are different approaches to this in your home, and Bill, your kitchen is newer than the other parts of the home as well, but it's about keeping things the same and about making changes. So, Karen, how about with you? You have a kitchen that is, as you described, of a certain style, and you don't want to change it. Why has that been important to you?
Well, because it works. I'm not a cook, so my husband does the cooking, and he finds that it just everything is very simply organised. It works perfectly well. We try not to have, storage is a bit of an issue. These houses, like for your wardrobes, in the 60s, I think people had much fewer belongings. So it does create a kind of discipline around not having too much stuff. But the change has never been a desire, because it hasn't been required.
And Bill, could you talk a bit more about that with your home? There are bits of it that are very much of 1967 when Robin Boyd first designed it for you, and then there are other bits that have been updated, but not so many. So what are some of the differences there for you?
It's, well, firstly, the kitchen we redid, I suppose is the word, in that basically it was redecorated in the same style. But me being an efficiency expert decided that rather than a division down the centre, one side was the cooking side and the other was eating, that we would remove that and put a central preparation area because there are a lot less steps if you can work from the centre to various spots in the periphery. I begun to appreciate that a little bit more, as I say, in the empty nest phase of my life, when I'm beginning to have to do a little bit in the kitchen.
How's that going for you?
But the rest of the house remained, in appearance, amazingly modern, given it's almost 50 years old. Some people are disappointed that it's the furniture, the fittings or the furniture is not 1960s. But a house is not a museum. Tastes change, people change, things wear out, things are renewed, so that over a long period of time there is much more change than one ever imagines oneself. I really didn't realise how much it had changed as far as the interior decorating is concerned until it was put recently by somebody who looked at the place. And I had to admit that from the date it was first used, we had a professional decorator, and it was decorated what the purists would call appropriate for the time. And I hadn't realised then how over nearly 50 years how much it changed. A lot of the change really is accidental. It just happens and you have this little bit and it's worn out and you get something new. But the basic house interior is rough sawn cedar that it's untreated, untouched. And the usual redecoration involves paint and changing colours. Women get, after a few years, an itch to change the colours. But this is not possible. You live with this timber. It's wonderful to see the varying shades of sunlight, as there's so much sunlight in that house. And it's very beautiful, but
it remains the same.
it remains the
So
same.
the vision that Boyd had, that you had almost 50 years ago, is as it was. So when you look back, I suppose, now, in our limited time today, he had the right idea for you at that time, and you shared that with him, and it still works today.
And it still works today. And as I say, it's worked for me. If you look at the lifestyle, I've had what can be only called very varying lifestyles and very varying ages of people living in the house, and it's always worked well. There's a certain degree of excitement in the house, which children love. My present grandchildren love to go to Grandma's place because it's a place to explore. It's interesting. Teenagers love it because they can get together and party with the
Because you can jump from the roof into the pool, can't you?
well, yes. I hate to admit. We had a couple of problems there of the intimacy of the pool with the rest of the house. Very soon after I was ensconced in the house, I was sitting in my useless way, I think it was a Sunday, reading the newspaper on the deck, and the kids are playing around in the pool. And I looked up, and my youngest child, who was then only perhaps 7, not quite 8, had found a way to climb up onto the roof, walk right along the roof, walk inwards over the cover, partial cover over the pool, look down, and fortunately it was at the deepest part of the pool, and jumped. At the moment I screamed out for him to stop, my eldest son said, "Calm down, Dad, it's all right. He's done that many times before." So that your best laid plans of mice and men gang afterglow.
Neil, Bill said your house is not a museum, and I know we've sort of touched on this, and maybe Karen, you can talk here as well. This particular house that you're living in now, where things are as they are, they remain as they were, designed by your father. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I like the way they were designed, and the furniture he's designed, and the decorations, the few that are on the wall. The only things I've changed is a couple of paintings that I've had that he didn't have. But it is a heritage house, and I feel an obligation to keep it as it is. I do have, purists coming in, and they say I think I should recover that long leather lounge that you saw there, made of cow's hide. And they'd say, "Oh, no, don't touch it." I think of, fixing the ceiling a bit. No, it's perfect the way it's like that. And I don't mind that. And I do think, though, that when this house is sold, and it'll have to be sold because the people that inherit the value from it, there's 4 or 5, 6, 7 grandchildren, and so they won't be able to split it. And whoever comes there is bound to change it. And I remember Seidler was suing someone in the newspaper. I read in the newspaper many years ago because a client had moved into a house and they were changing it, and he was suing them. And I think he lost his case. But that heritage house, although it's known in a lot of places, the interior will be changed. The idea of painting beautiful bricks white, it's just terrible. And orange the next year, well, it's orange in this house, but that was done initially. But so I don't. The other day a chair broke, and it's quite expensive to have repaired. But I feel as though I need to do that. And the curtains, I think, well, I've got to hunt down the sort of curtains that used to be there 50 years ago.
So are you being a custodian of the interiors or of your father's vision? Is that the same thing?
Well, it's the same thing because the vision's there,
yeah.
And I just feel I need to keep it the way it is because I do like it that way. But there are a lot of people who want me to keep it that way You know, here, for example, a lot of architects, I have architects visit from overseas, and you just don't want to.
You don't want to change it.
No.
Maybe Karen, can you talk a bit more about that as well? Do you see yourself in some ways as a custodian, as Neil is talking about with his father's home that he's living in?
Our furniture isn't built in, and we brought it with us, so it's a bit different. And I think it's that balance of comfort and family life with what works with the period. So, we did make a mistake. We bought a very kind of nice, neat 60s leather sofa, but we all found that we were sitting probably like we were in your waiting room, Bill, kind of,
like
all very prim, and it just didn't work. So we had to find something else that was much more comfortable and more contemporary, but actually still visually, worked within the house. It was still low. And it was still, the colours went. So I think we've tried to bring in some things that kind of modernise it. I mean, Japanese and Danish work very well together. And then a lot of contemporary designs that are low and timber and kind of crafted kind of work in that interior.
But it has to work for you and for your younger family, doesn't
it?
Mm.
And it's funny though, when I was an editor at Inside Out, all sorts of fads come and go, and I remember chandeliers and thinking, I'd love a chandelier, and then looking at the house and going, it's just not going to work. So I sort of see it protected me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Bruce would not have been happy. So sometimes having a house that has a kind of set look kind of protects you a bit from the vagaries of fashion, which are very appealing at times.
Yeah. And one of the things that you brought up, Karen, was this idea that you're living outside but you're inside. And in each of your homes, that is very much present. So can I ask a really simple question? What's your favourite place to sit in your home as you live in your iconic home? Is there some spot that you
I mean, it's like today when you get that winter sun coming in at that where the doors are, just to be able to sit there and read the paper and have a coffee and chat. It's just, and I think Bruce was very much about those simple pleasures rather than big complicated design statements. It was about connection to site and living there and orientation and no air conditioning. So actually quite simple elemental things. So I don't mentioned earlier about, do you wake up and think, oh, I'm so fantastic, I'm in this iconic house. And actually it's almost the opposite. It's the low key, the simple, the everyday that kind of gives you that connection rather than any grand thought.
Yeah. Is that the same for you, Bill?
Yes, well, if you believe the adage that a house is a machine to live in, the machinery, I think, is most comfortable for the inhabitants if it's unseen and not obvious. I always think if it's well arranged, it reminds me of the definition of a good waiter. He's never around when you're comfortable and eating, and the very moment that you go to want something, somehow he's appeared. That translated to the inert is what a well-designed house from the interior, quite not the aesthetic sense, but the well-designed house from the interior serves your needs without having to do much. It's hard to describe, but I always admire it when I see something in the house that basically is more efficient at doing some simple everyday function than the general run-of-the-mill.
And what's your favourite place to sit down and chill, Bill?
I think, no doubt, the kitchen. It's the brightest room. Boyd, at the time when I talked to him, when he asked me which room in the house I'd accept no view, said we've got to make sure that the kitchen has the best view. It's certainly the best room in the house. It has the best vista.
And you're up there amongst the trees, aren't you?
And you have this, the house is attempted to not be there if it doesn't have to be. You feel that you're not up among the trees but in a closed hide that a photographer would be in, but you're up there with the birds. That has a disadvantage too. If you open your house to the environment. The animals and so on of the environment tend to want to go the other way, and I think we've trapped and re-released nearly 60 possums over 50 years.
You got possums too, Neil?
And the birds obviously think it is just another tree that's got food, because they fly in and quite happily and ignore the dog. But of course they can cause an awful mess when they get caught inside and then get panicky.
Oh.
So
It's because it's all glass on the interior. You can open up the windows, get lots of cross ventilation. Yeah.
and there are disadvantages to all, and the iconic houses often have a wonderful answer to some problem, but the very fact that they have a special answer often has its own disadvantages. The other note, you asked me about the effect of the pool. Boyd, of course, said to me just before he saw the final inspection that you'd be able to, the children jump into the pool and swim over to breakfast. And that really was praise for what I really wanted, was a swimming pool, an intrinsic part of the house, like the shower was. It wasn't an extra, a fancy extra. I think that really describes what I mean.
Yeah, and that porthole, by the way, as you walk in downstairs, that we saw in the image, that was Boyd's suggestion, wasn't it?
That was Boyd's suggestion. The porthole is in the wall.
Make sure you're wearing pants when you're in the pool.
And it's halfway down the depth of the pool so that you're looking into the pool. It was a great attraction to the teenagers, particularly when the adults weren't there, getting girls to show off, you might say, and take pictures through the thing, but it didn't work, unfortunately. The modern cameras would have taken care of it.
I took a couple when I was there the other day. So I'm just teasing, I'm sorry. We'll get some questions in a moment. Neil, I've asked Karen and Bill where their favourite place is to live. Rather than your new house, can we go back to the first house that you mentioned?
It was probably in bed, really.
You were a teenager.
No, I guess the living room in both places was a living room, and I don't see it as so much as a mechanical house as a sculpture, especially the second house. And I've always been attracted to sculptures that actually, unless it's Rodin, it's just fantastic on its own. I like sculptures to do a few things, and there's one in Paris. There's one by Tingley that floats around on a little lake that people may have seen, and I just love that sort of stuff. And I just think a sculpture that does something is the best sort of sculpture, and that's the sort of sensation I get in the house.
What about that bathroom? Are you inviting us all over for
Yeah.
soak?
It's a fairly small bathroom, but it should fit quite a few people.
There are so many questions I could ask, honestly, but we're talking about living in iconic homes. Our three guests live in iconic homes. I don't want to show you my home. It makes me feel really embarrassed. There's nothing iconic about it, that's for sure. If you have a question for Karen, Neil or Bill, please raise your hands. Thank you. Oh, we've got a couple of roving mics, actually, because we're recording today. So, did you have a question?
I don't know if you all have children, but can you say a bit about children growing up in those houses and your observation of their reaction?
I'll go
Karen,
first
yeah,
then.
you go.
Yes, my son was about 5 when we moved into the house, and my daughter was born there. So at first they'd go to their friends' houses, which had huge TVs and things like that, and swimming pools, and they'd come back rather disparaging of the house they lived in. But they've grown to love it over the years, I have to say. And what it does, and I think Bruce would like this, it has connected them to nature. You know, they look at the skies, and now with Instagram they're going, is this sky Instagram worthy? You know, they're actually, which is good. So yeah, they kind of, nature is around them, and they're tuned into that in a way. And so now they are, I think they've become quite protective about it. So, but we've also, I guess the furniture thing is an issue for some people. You know, people say things like, oh, we'll buy good furniture when the kids have grown up. But somehow we had 6 years between ours, and we managed to get them to lift, not drag, and not, you know, so we've trained them, they're indoctrinated, and that's how we've coped.
Great question about living in space with children. Thank you.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So I grew up in a Bruce Rickard house.
Oh, did you? Go for it.
My parents had a house built for them by Bruce, which we moved out of when I was 12, so I had sort of very formative period in it. And it was just the most magical experience growing up in it. It was really quite extraordinary. It was set sort of at the end of a dead-end road by the bush. We could jump off the roof onto the, you know, the steep embankment. We used to jump off the roof onto the, down to the, with my mum's umbrella as a parachute, down onto the lawn below. He'd, you know, the balcony, which was a concrete sort of cantilevered balcony, he'd left a big bit of rock sticking up out of the balcony, so we used to sort of drive our, you know, toy cars all over it. It was just an extraordinary experience.
Oh, now I really am jealous. Goodness
But
gracious.
Bruce loved a party, and he liked his houses to be used for entertaining and people coming together. They had a very communal spirit, so he would be delighted that you had such a formative time.
It was fantastic. Unfortunately, the house was butchered.
Oh, which that's another question I wanted to talk about as well, which is about change and legacy. But we might do that towards the end. But a couple more questions from you, if you've got some for Neil and Bill. And don't be shy. Thank you. Just here at the front.
I just have a question about how do you feel about people kind of walking past and driving past and looking in from an owner and occupier's point of view?
Or paddling past, in Neil's case. Neil?
Well, driving past is a public place, and actually that never disturbed us very much. Paddling past, I was saying to Fenella, once you're over 40, it's their problem more than mine.
I'm getting so close to that now, I'm scared.
But I do get a lot of people wanting to look at it, and I feel a bit uncomfortable by not letting general people coming to look. It worries me, for example, that it could be raining, there are 7, 8 people that come in, the place is, you know, mud swept, and once in the past something was taken. And but I do like to show architects or people that have a sort of professional commitment to it, and I guess every month, couple of people come around or ring up and I show them around. And often there are people standing outside. It's a little track outside the house, and I don't have any problem with that. In fact, I'm quite pleased.
Good question about privacy. And with Bill's home, though, it's incredibly private, isn't it?
Yes, well, and it was difficult to do in the sense that I wanted privacy, and at the same time, as far as from interior concerned, the house hardly existed. I was part of the environment, but not part of not the living environment or the street environment. And that he was able to do this, I think is quite an achievement. Because if you look at the two requests, they tend to oppose one another. If you want your house open to everything, then it's very open to the observer, the external observer, and this is not so. It can be carried too far. Some people have looked at the house and felt vaguely uncomfortable. I think they need a little more of the English castle around them. They feel they're not protected. This is emotional level. They're not protected, or they're not looked after enough. There's not enough house around them. It is there, but a lot of it's glass, a lot of it
Because the house
visually.
doesn't take up the entire site, you mean? Yeah. It's a bit small. The rooms are smaller. The bedrooms in particular.
The bedrooms. Boyd never actually expressed this, but he looked on the house one. The architect always never had enough floor space. It was never big enough, and he divided it really into living space and private space. The private space was bedrooms and bathrooms, and he had the priority very much for the public space, and combined with the so-called open plan of one area leading into another and can be separated temporarily by sliding doors and so on. This greatly added to the apparent size of the house. The living area of the house was bigger than the house. But inevitably, the bedrooms and bathrooms were small. They're all small by today's standard. I think we've all mentioned
And
this.
that's the same with you, Karen. You just mentioned that before.
I can accept it. There's a strong Japanese influence. Boyd was very strongly, what shall I say, influenced by the Japanese idea. And certainly the bedrooms have a serenity. We sleep well in them, even strangers. So they're fairly small, but they're appropriate. They're enough.
They're enough.
The bathrooms are very much a utility. It's so far removed from the Roman idea of, a place to stay, talk, entertain and wash. All you can do in our bathrooms is...
Well, you don't need to, because you can just jump out of your bedroom window and into the pool. So, and have a swim that way. Another question? Thank you. Oh, here we go. This one in the middle, then at the front, then at the back.
My wife and I have just bought a house built by Russell Jack in Wahroonga. The house that he won the 1962 Architecture Award with. And the Wahroonga house is very much like described by the speakers today, where we wanted a house which was inside, outside. And the floors are terracotta tiles, which the grandchildren are forbidden to ride their blade scooters on. The walls, a lot of the walls are floor-to-ceiling windows, and it's all this bricks, a sandstock. So the original sandstocks in about 62, where later in the early 70s, when houses were built with clinkers and the newer sandstocks, these are the actual 62 versions, and we've had people come in exactly what has been said. Couldn't handle that. We have to paint that. The kitchen is it's a galley kitchen with which is quite narrow, where you can stand in the middle of the floor. One hand you've got the sink, the second hand you've got the cooktop, one pace to the oven, one pace to the fridge. And most of the doors slide. And after 60 years, every door slides properly.
Oh, so that's good news. And you're going to keep it that way, aren't you?
We are.
No, okay. So which very, very quickly, maybe Karen, you can talk about.
We're actually doing what Karen's doing, just being a custodian of the house, where our daughters would love us to change the kitchen. Several other people have come in and said, "Oh, this is a horrible thing. We've got to get rid of it." A trained chef that I know walked in the kitchen and said, "Peter, this is fantastic." And we love it too. So
Karen, just if I could.
Well, I think you're very lucky. It sounds wonderful. And you have to meet Annalisa afterwards, who has another Russell Jack house.
Connection here that Bob Ellis, who built the Lyons house, actually built the Jacobs house as well. The same builder. Well, I actually live in Russell Jack's Jack house. Russell Jack's own house, and I've been to see that house, and I've been there with Bob Ellis, and we went through a tour of it before you bought it. So it's a beautiful house. That's the Wilkinson Award-winning Jacobs house. Yeah, fantastic. So it's the same builder. And I live in Boundary Road, yes, just around the corner. So you'll have to come for a cup of tea.
And hang on.
Oh, and that's Bob Ellis. An extraordinary builder, Bob.
I don't think I could have curated that to happen.
I also built part of the Jack house.
You did, that's right. Yes, and Russell's new joinery in his new place that he's living in now.
I built 12 jack houses.
That's right. Exactly.
Hang on, so you...
Can I just make another comment? The joinery work in this house, in our house, is brilliant. Everything works, as Bob said, it's 60 years old. The house is 60 years old. All the joinery is fantastic. And Janet keeps saying to me, I keep finding things. I keep finding cupboards.
So this
And
is,
it's just amazing.
this is
She's got this sewing cupboard, which to see her working in it is just amazing.
yeah. So this is the joy about living in iconic homes, which is why we're here today. Well, let's get some more questions before we have to wrap up pretty soon. So just at the front here, thank you.
Different to iconic houses, I don't know a lot about iconic houses, but I've just bought a heritage house in northern New South Wales, and I really identify with what you're saying about custodianship, and probably we don't have the time today to explore that, but our whole idea of ownership of houses, I think if it shifts to more of this is going to be passed on to the next generation or to a different, and have different uses. There is great value in that. And I'd just like to hear, I heard from Karen say that, but perhaps from the other guests.
I do think a problem you can't resolve is you have just take a street in Paddington. You've got the Federation houses that are very beautiful. They're protected. They look great. And they look across the street at a 3-storey 50s flats. And so the people in the flats, they can paint the outside whenever they want. They can change the structure. They can pull the building down. But in the heritage house, you don't do anything. So in your house that you're the custodian of, you're looking across at something that you think is awful. And the people that living in that, what you think is awful, have got the luxury of looking across at your place that you can never move. And I do think that's a difficult problem. I think if you have a heritage listing on a garden, it's a bit different because at least you can, walk around and enjoy your garden, but it's probably costs a lot to keep it in order. So I don't know how that is resolved. I think in the end you get you have a pleasure of having a place that you can be a custodian of, and you also feel some sort of responsibility into the future, and you try and protect it for as long as you can. And I don't know how that long is. I suspect not that long in the scheme of things.
Thank you. There's a question at the back with the microphone. The gentleman with the... So we'll just get through some questions now. Thank you.
I only saw the slide briefly there, but the Boyd House appears that it has the swimming pool built in virtually the center of a sort of squared section, and it looks very much like a beautiful Hamilton Island resort where people come out of their sliding doors and use the pool and then move to the other side or around the different things and so on. In these days and age, the pool would, in most pools, require a substantial separation from the protection for the children primarily. That's council requirements and so on. I didn't see that in there, and I just wondered whether there would be a requirement. It sounds like it would. It looks like it would kind of destroy the image that I was just describing, and I wondered whether maybe council gave you some dispensation, or what's the story there?
We're in the process of exploring that now. Whether
Damn, you brought it up.
theoretically, it would destroy in many ways the elegance of the internal, external area if that pool was partitioned off or fenced off by some means. On two sides, it's easy to do. On the third and fourth side, you're against a wall of glass. It can theoretically pass, and this is the possible argument at the moment, in that the whole of the internal face of the three wings of the house are glass, alternating fixed glass, floor to ceiling, or sliding glass. All those sliding doors can be locked by shot bolts, which are above, I forget whatever the legal height is that children so-called can't get at it, so that theoretically it is fenced. Of course, in practice, kids come and go and you haven't always got them locked, but I'm not quite sure it is a problem at present to be solved. Whether any dispensation would be given that I've successfully been able to raise 2 families there. And
but it's been there for many years, and the council requirements have been there for a number of years too. How you hidden it away from them some successfully?
well, perhaps I shouldn't go into this any further. It's a problem. I cannot see an easy way of satisfying the rules if they stick to the exact rules without almost destroying that internal
courtyard space.
elegance, if you like.
Thank you for your question. Just here at the front.
Yes, we had that similar problem as well up at Avalon. It was a Californian ranch style house, and the pool was there in that sense. And the rule was, depending when it was built, if it was built before the rules came in for the fences, you had the dispensation then. But it was a real worry for me all the time. I would have liked a fence which would have destroyed the appearance of the place, but so because the kids, as I said, wandered up as well. And again, with the roof, you could jump into the pool from the roof when we were away. The children did that as well. But we have another friend whose son got killed in a situation like that too. So it's a very emotional thing for me.
Yeah.
But yes, and your comment, Karen, about that corner of part of your house, I'm very good friends with the Marshalls, and that is the area that we all had our parties in as well.
Yes.
So yes, and so that was the right spot.
Any good stories?
Yes, it was a fantastic house, and they've built another house up on the north coast by Rickard as well, and they've taken another step further, and it's very, very refined and beautiful property.
Part of the problem is the rigidity of the various councils. The Sutherland Council, there is a place in Gymea Bay in which there is a wall, retaining wall, and there's 30 feet of water of the bay immediately beyond it. Now, suspended on top of the wall is a swimming pool, which hangs on 4 sides over 30 feet of water. It has to be fenced. It's. I don't know how you deal with it. There's a problem with young children, but I suppose there's 100 miles of foreshore around Port Hacking, with enough water to drown kids. And what do you do about it? You live with it like children in the bush live with
about
snakes.
the changing nature of what the house, when the house was designed, things were a certain way. Things are different today. So Neil's living with a bar fridge quite happily, but the pool is a sort of a similar thing where you need to make an updation. Stick to my day job, hey. How do you bring things up to today's standard? There's a standard of how we choose to live as a custodian, and then there's a standard that's put on us by councils and other kind of regulations. So there's always there's a bit of a balance there, I imagine. We might need to wrap it up pretty soon, but
maybe one more question and then we'll go wrap it up.
Can we have a question just behind you, actually, because you've had one already? Do you mind? Sorry. Oh, I'm so
Sorry
mean.
about that. I just had a question more for Karen probably than the other speakers. How does living in an iconic house compare to living in a non-iconic house? And how does living in an iconic house inspire you, and maybe how the house encouraged you or got the best out of you in some way, personally?
That's a nice question. I grew up in Northern Ireland, and we lived in sort of converted, I guess, Victorian. Belfast was quite a Victorian city, so, red brick, lots of levels and so forth. And then when I moved to London, I lived in a terrace house. So it was always houses that were from another era. So this is the first time I've ever lived in a house that has had the consideration of architectural thinking. So when I look back, of course, you're sort of, when you don't know any different, you're perfectly happy where you are. It's only when you've had the experience of something different that you understand it. And the things that I take away from it are light, access to, you know, orientation. Now, for me, if I was ever doing anything again, would be an enormous factor. And also, I like the fact that it's not air conditioned, that actually you open some windows. And, you know, there are some of those very hot days where you're very hot, but mostly it's fine. So there are things about it that I really appreciate. And the second part of the question was sort of about how it's influenced things. I mean, I see living in this house of almost having kind of changed the course of my professional life, because I'd edited magazines for a long time, and doing the books and having to learn about architecture and ask architects the right questions as a layperson in order to draw out of them the information has taught me an enormous amount, both from that period, from the 50s, because the second book is sort of 70s, 80s, 90s. So in that second book, all the architects were alive to be interviewed and talked to and to understand their varying, you know, aesthetic approaches. So I've now, having kind of left the print publishing world, I'm now doing another book, and the opportunity came to curate this exhibition, which is a completely new experience for me. So I'm very grateful to what the house has kind of taught me and what it's led to in turn.
Is it still teaching you?
Always.
Really?
Oh, I always feel on the back foot. I am not an intellectual about architecture. I am always learning, always asking. And everybody has a different approach and a different answer. So, you know, the next book, I've got this house from these Chilean architects working outside Barcelona. And again, it's a whole new set of questions you have to learn. And people are thinking in different ways. So it's sort of now cross-cultural and so forth. So I've got a really good grounding of understanding from my experience here.
Yeah. Might be, just quickly, Neil, are you today learning something more about
I think what Karen said is pretty close to what I feel. I've lived in many houses that weren't my parents' houses, and you learn that south is the cold side. You want the sun coming up. You want the afternoon sun or the morning sun. All three of us have these tiny kitchens, relatively tiny kitchens, which I think all three of us like. And the houses have just got ridiculously big, and you've got to walk around and clean the whole place, you know.
Can you just use your staff?
Well, I haven't got the weight that Bill fantasised about. But it's true. You get. I'm a big fan of watching grand designs, and probably most of you people have seen it too if you've come here. And that's the ABC program at 6 o'clock at night. And
just a couple of days after the 9 a.m. on Saturday morning radio show.
Yeah.
That one.
But you can see the people that aren't using architects get completely lost, and they usually build absolute rubbish, and it's just bigger and bigger. I mean, and then half the time they've run out of money. I mean, it's just ludicrous. And I suppose I'm not I think you need an architect who thinks and then plans, and then you get the best out of it. And you just like the place you have. You enjoy coming home. You like having people there. When it's cold, it's a bit cold. When it's hot, it's a bit hot. But that's part of the living in life.
Yeah. What a great way to wrap up as well, I've got to say. Wow, I could talk with these amazing people for ages, and I think they deserve a huge round of applause. Karen McCartney, Bill Lyons, Neil Buhrich.